Welcome back to History 201. I'm Justin.
And I'm River, and today we will be talking about the Second Industrial Revolution. Justin, describe the significance of the advancements that occurred in the new industries that emerged during the Second Industrial Revolution.
All right. During the Industrial Revolution, many industries advanced very quickly because of new forms of material and energy. This can be seen in farming, traveling, housing, and war. In farming, crops were able to grow faster because of new fertilizers being discovered. An example of these fertilizers is guano. Guano was a fertilizer made from seabird excrement on the islands on the coast of Peru. These new fertilizers allowed farmers to keep up with the growing population in Europe and other places as they industrialized. The Peru and British guano market from 1840 to 1870 by W. M. Matthews states that turnips and grass appear to have been the main recipients, and the dry soil areas of eastern England and pasture lands of Cheshire the principal consuming regions. Guano also increased the amount of land that could be used to farm, as drier areas were not able to be farmed on in previous times. Advancement in energy production, such as electricity and the steam engine, increased the efficiency of factories and transportation. As a result of the creation of the light bulb that could run on electricity, factories could now stay open longer and work during the night. This increased the output of factories, allowing for countries to industrialize faster. The steam engine improved transportation as trains and steamships could transport objects and people faster and could also transport more people than before. As production of steel increased, it could be used to make stronger trains and ships that could carry more weight and move more people and objects. Buildings were also made of steel, which increased a city's infrastructure and made it stronger, as it allowed taller buildings to be made, such as skyscrapers, to fit more people and factories in to increase production. As advancements in chemicals were made, soap was created, allowing workers to clean themselves, stopping illness, which increased production in factories. And superphosphate lime was also created as a fertilizer that increased the production of crops.
Explain how advancements in communication and transportation, specifically around steamships, telegraphs, and railroads, affected external and internal migrations during this time.
Okay. As more jobs became available in cities and other countries due to factories and other advancements in the Second Industrial Revolution, more people began to migrate to these places to make money. Inventions such as the railroads and steamships became essential, as they could move people at a faster rate than other forms of transportation at the time, such as horses and carriages. Railroads were used to transport people internally and externally, as people moved from rural to urban areas within their countries to work in the factories and cities. This can be seen on the map I have here, where railroads ran everywhere through Europe, and they allowed people to move internally and externally through these countries in Europe with ease. Steamships were used during external migrations, as now people could travel over oceans at a faster rate and safer rate than possible before. Steamships could also reduce the shipping and travel time between different countries overseas by as much as 50% in some places. The telegraph allowed people to talk over long distances, allowing people to move farther away from other people while still being able to communicate with each other. This enabled people to move to different places that were farther away, and normally you wouldn't have communication in those places, and would still allow them to send information back home.
Compare the industrialization efforts of the United States and Russia.
The United States and Russia progressed in many similar and different ways. One of the main differences in their industrialization was the government's involvement. The U.S. took a more laissez-faire approach and backed up with their government policies. They gave railroads more land to use, and there was less government supervision. They also provided tax breaks and even promoted corporations by creating laws that allowed people to easily form them. The United States was the first to use many different techniques involving mass production as well. This includes the assembly line, interchangeable parts, and scientific management, which allowed for products to be made and output to the community faster. Unlike Russia, socialism was not able to be easily spread throughout the United States thanks to its diversity, unions, and availability of housing. The United States' diversity stopped the working class from working as one, unlike places in Europe, because they came from many different regions and they had many different racial backgrounds. The unions stopped socialism as they focused more on skilled workers and less on unskilled workers. Also didn't take part in politics. As land was more available in the United States, more people owned their own property and land could be sold for cheaper. People who had their own property were against socialism as they didn't want their property and objects to be shared with others. The United States also had the progressives who were successfully able to reform and get better policies for workers in factories, improving their quality of life. Russia, unlike the United States, was far more unsuccessful at stopping radicals and socialism, as Russia's factory workers were treated poorly and had no legal force and were all serfs, had similar origins, and were homogeneous in many ways, allowing them to unify as a class. Russia's government also had a tighter hold over its people and businesses. Factory owners had to go through the government to get anything approved and look to the government for protection from their unhappy workers. The combination of limited legal rights for those not among the nobility or the Tsar and the poor treatment of workers led to a revolution which forced the Tsar to create reforms for the working class. The creation of these reforms was an effort by Russia that was very successful. Legal unions were created and allowed workers a place to speak about their grievances. Because of the reforms, workers were also being treated better and their quality of life was increased.
Describe the industrialization process in Latin America during this time and how successful they were.
Latin America's industrialization process was very different from other countries as they made money by exporting raw materials to other industrializing countries instead of producing their own materials. This was very successful to Latin America's economy as the value of goods that they were exporting increased by tenfold. The money made from exporting goods allowed Latin America to import machinery, weapons, tools, and more from other industrializing countries such as the United States. As Latin America industrialized, they wanted to become more like Europe and other successful countries they had seen. They did this in many ways by building railroads, which were very successful as they reduced the amount of shipping time it took to get goods exported, and they also began learning about European culture and began increasing the number of white people in their population. This was unsuccessful, though, as white people were not the source of industrialization. It was their communities working as a whole. Mexico, similar to Russia, had a revolution that was very successful in giving the working class more legal rights and a better quality of life. They also limited other countries from owning Mexico's land and property. Latin America was unsuccessful in getting rid of foreign countries' property on their land, though, and dependent development kept some Latin American countries back and lessened their ability to industrialize as they became subservient to industrializing countries such as the United States and other places in Europe. So, okay, River, how do you think socialism emerged or came to be as a reaction to capitalism? How do you think that the Marxists reacted, and what were their complaints, and what solutions were offered?
With the Industrial Revolution holding a firm grasp over the world at this point, the reality of how brutal and dangerous capitalism could be became very apparent. First, to clear up what capitalism is an economic system that is based around private ownership, and as such with the system is much more tailored to benefit the individual. The individuals in such an economy will go to many lengths to save money and earn more, such as the infamous and outright cruel exploitation of the working class. Factory owners would hire women and children to pay workers less, they would reduce safety aspects of said factories to reduce costs, and they would give them absurdly long and exhausting hours with little to no breaks.
Terrible.
The capitalist system was just completely predatory and exploitive by nature. Eventually, people became sick of this type of system that would put forth a better alternative. One such system was socialism, an economic system based around state ownership rather than private ownership, and was much more tailored to benefit society rather than the individual. This system would grant greater power to less fortunate classes, like the working class, and destroy the predatory behaviors of capitalism with government control over the economy. This system, while good in theory, had begun to argue with itself as to how much state control should be exerted. On one side, socialism would have state control of the economy, but would still grant some power to private ownership, taking a page out of the capitalist handbook. On the other side, the new idea of Marxism emerged. This system would give far more control to the government and outright aim to abolish the class structure, leading to a classless society.
That's very interesting. What were labor movements done for, and what tactics did they use? What were they reacting to? What were their demands?
With the Industrial Revolution fully underway, factory owners sought to increase their profits through strategies like wage reductions, long work days, and overall just brutal exploitation. The workers had become sick of such conditions and sought change. The labor movements began to form to combat such harsh conditions and to protect their rights as workers and citizens. They employed tactics such as boycotts and strikes to achieve such goals, and would usually preach the same ideas brought forth by Republicans of the American Revolution, who hoped for an equal society and celebration of hard-working laborers.
Alright, and last question. How did countries in Asia react to industrialization in Europe?
The Industrial Revolution absolutely skyrocketed the military, economic, and political power of European countries, who would begin to march on the rest of the world to find raw materials to feed the engines of their empires. This would bring them to the doorstep of Asian states, and one of the first reactions, or rather interactions with new European powerhouses, came from the Opium Wars between Qing China and Britain, in which the Queen lost badly. The result was the loss of several territories, and most famous among them was Hong Kong. With the realization kicking on how outmatched China was against Europe, they were faced with the decision: modernize or fall behind. The Qing dynasty would choose to modernize while also retaining key aspects of their own society. This wave of reforms would be called the self-strengthening movement, and it aimed to modernize the country as to keep their place, albeit small, on the world stage. They would send scholars and other government officials to learn the new industrial technology, while also aiming to hire specific people who were more adept at modern problems in this government. While good for the country, not all agreed with this. Most people, like Confucius scholars and the Empress Cixi herself, did not like them because they believed they went against their Confucius teachings or would diminish their power. Another Asian state that faced this new Europe would be the Ottoman Empire. Some of their interactions would also be military defeats against Europe and the loss of substantial amounts of land in Eastern Europe and Africa. With their military defeats, the Ottomans were forced to sign reforms that gave tax and law exempts to Europeans in Ottoman territory. The Ottomans were faced with the same decision that the Qing were faced with, which was to modernize or fall behind. The Ottomans accepted modernization completely and would even send diplomats to venture into Europe to learn modern techniques and mimic their industry. The Ottoman Empire would undergo the Tanzimat reforms, which would strengthen the military with more administrative institutions. This would not go over well with some groups like the Islamic scholars and the famous Janissaries, who believed that this modernization would reduce their power, and the result was a revolution against the Sultan, which was crushed with the Janissaries abolished. The Islamic scholars wrote against the Sultan and the state as the Tanzimat reforms would ruin their power and prestige.
And that is all the time we have for today. All your favorite history facts in one place. This is History 201, signing out.